Hey, you. Come here. Yeah, come here. Look at me. Don't use Revivify. Don't do it. Don't do it. And I know, you're probably saying, Riker, then why would they put it into the game? But I'm willing to bet that you've asked yourself, well, how can I make death a little bit more meaningful? Like, it just seems so easy to pop up and down out of life. Like, the game is just a big old whack-a-mole for the villains, honestly. But you've probably looked at other videos and maybe pulled some homebrew from Matthew Mercer to try to make your Revivify a little bit more evocative. Or you just tried to make diamonds really hard to get in your world and you end up trying to just fix the system when there are so many other alternatives that you can use. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you alternatives for your adventurers running to a street corner to the nearest church every time a player dies. Now don't worry, these will still give your players the opportunity to play their beloved characters even after an unfortunate demise. However, it will give you other options for more creative and evocative storytelling within these consequences. Welcome to the Cleric Corner. My name is Riker, and here we talk about all things Dungeons and Dragons, tapping into our higher powers to create worlds more unique and stories more impactful. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still have diamonds all over your world and still have Revivify sitting pretty on your cleric spell list. But you've probably heard it before, or even thought it before. Death needs a long-lasting consequence and an impact on the story. So again, before putting an automatic respawn in every city, consider these alternatives. Number 1. The Hollyphant. These challenge rating 5 celestial creatures belong in the upper planes. They are messengers for the gods, but they do populate other realms of existence as well. But really conveniently, they know the spell Raise Dead. Now, what I won't do is go into deep lore about these things, otherwise we'll be here forever, but you can definitely take one of these Hollyphants and put it into your game. Imagine your players have a character die, and what they do, like they've done in all other campaigns, is go to the nearest church in order to get that person revived. Now, I do realize that this is not the case for every campaign, nor the case for every player, but bear with me. In this campaign, when they go to the church, they realize that diamonds haven't been seen in over 10 years. However, there are rumors of this creature, the Hollyphant, that lives in the upper mountains a few miles away. There's some ruins up there that have not entirely been discovered because it's difficult to get to. The adventurers do eventually decide to go and inquire with the creature. Now, this also gives an opportunity to tie into some of your players' backstories. Take your druid, for example. Perhaps they're going around the world collecting different rare wildlife in order to take back and recover their forest. So they'll be able to find some of these key plants on top of that mountain as well. Or that when they eventually find these ruins, they find sigils and wards that match the sigils within the Warlock's tome. And you're probably thinking, but wait, what about the player who died? What are they doing? Are they just not playing this whole time as they go on this side adventure? No, I say give them the opportunity to play something different for this one adventure. Perhaps they are a member of this church that the party originally went to who decided to help in obtaining this Hollyphant. Once the quest is done, the bonus character returns to the church, and now you have a free NPC fleshed out for you. And also something you can tie in later in the campaign. Number 2, a Warlock Pact. Let's take these ruins on top of the mountain. Let's say that you get there and either the Hollyphant isn't there, or you failed the test of faith that it had for you. But being in these ruins and seeing the sigils that match their tome, they have a unique opportunity to reach out to their patron. You can give them an opportunity to make another deal, or sweeten the pot of the deal that they've already made. What kind of things can this patron squeeze out of this opportunity because of the mistakes that this party had that led to one of the player deaths? After all, patrons are opportunistic, and if I was a patron, I'd want to take advantage of that. The players might not even have to go to a runic channeling site. The patron might just be greedy and reach out to them first. This gives you, as a DM, more to play with as you go about the campaign. Perhaps the deal just gives the downed player an extra few days of life before they have to figure out another alternative. But if you think another player wouldn't want to make the sacrifice, or after they denied the deal that the patron offered, perhaps then the patron went to the downed character, visits them in their dream, and offers them the deal directly. Now, players that have a specific level up path that they're unwilling to part from might not like this alternative, especially if you force them to take a Warlock level because they made this pact. But making a pact with a Warlock patron doesn't mean you have to take a level in one. But with the right player who loves roleplay, you have to ask yourself, how does this change things going forward? How will they want to level up after this? Number 3, a Lich. Now with some of these, you want to talk with the player beforehand, making sure that they know that they will have to be creative when it comes to reviving from death and the associated consequences. And when it comes to something like the Lich, you want to have that open channel of communication with that player. Because if your players are desperate enough, they might inquire about eternal life from the living dead. Liches are spellcasters that embrace undeath in order to live forever, usually to continue their research over multiple lifetimes in order to have more time, or that they're just scared of what will come to them in the life beyond. But your players, knowing that this Lich had to have done it before, maybe they can do it again with your downed character. The cost well known, however, turning this player into an undead creature, possibly using the reborn lineage from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Or perhaps the Lich isn't even a Lich yet. Perhaps it's just a necromancer wizard who is trying and needs a test subject. Now, there's a small chance that it would work, just like an experimental surgery in the real world, but they're dead already, so why does it matter? You just have to ask yourself, is the undeath worth it for what the player still has yet to accomplish? But then how does that undeath impact the story as a whole? How does it impact that player's story? Number 4, a doppelganger. Now this one also takes a little forethought and planning, as doppelgangers usually take on the form of someone else in order to replace them. Now again, have a feeling at your table on whether or not this is okay, but imagine your players seeing one of their characters go down and their flesh peels back and it becomes something more leathery and gray. But seeing this doppelganger, they realize that their friend was replaced, possibly in the city that they just left from. And there's a good chance that if they go back, they might still find them alive. Possibly even leave a hint on the person of the dead doppelganger to let your players know where they might go in order to find your still alive character. They retrace their steps and oh, it was a brothel that was actually an underground cover for a doppelganger nest. They find their companion hurt, weak, but still alive. But if you didn't have time to prepare beforehand, or it really just didn't work in the situation, possibly bring the doppelganger to replace the party's dead character, allowing them in a way to continue to play as themselves. The consequences obviously being that they may not have the same memories as their previous body, and that their race might be a changeling, but you can tie in the story by having this doppelganger trailing this party, but wanting to join them because they overheard the acts of heroism and felt inspired. And luckily there's a vacancy in the party. But knowing that this is a doppelganger and not the real thing, how does that affect party dynamic? Number 5, a simulacrum. Similar to the doppelganger, you can use a simulacrum to create, again, a buffer for a player character. The spell creates a duplicate of the individual that when killed turns to snow and melts. This could be something that the player knew was going to happen and they decided to put in a safeguard for it. Or they were kidnapped by a local wizard in order to do experimentations on and were replaced by this simulacrum. But another spell that you could use would be clone. What an interesting thing for your player to find out when they realize that their patron, their church, or other organization has created clones of them for their own divine purposes. What a greater surprise to the individual when they realize that they are not the original. Perhaps this evil organization has made clones of the entire party. When one player dies, conveniently one of these other clones escaped their facility and came to warn the party. This one personally would be a great world building tool. Now, if you feel that this video has added value to you and want to see more like it, why don't you consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel? My current goal is to reach 10K by the end of the year, which would be phenomenal starting just in August of last year. I've just been really impressed by the support and all of the amazing ideas and creativity that's now shared in our little community. But creativity and individuality and the freedom to do so is really what I stand for a lot on this channel. So if that resonates with you, come and join the conversation. Number 6, reincarnation. If straight reviving is hard to do in your world, other opportunities could create bigger consequences. The players might even seek out a druid for one of these alternatives. With the spell reincarnate, yes, there is materials that take to cast the spell, but nothing more than natural materials that cost 1,000 gold pieces. The catch is the player reincarnates to a different race according to a spell table or roll table on the spell. And unless you're a really generous DM, they do not get to choose the new race that they turn into. Perhaps this sends them on a quest to get their body back, so they pore over books for research, and this also gives you an opportunity to add more lore into the adventure. And just so that this point stands out to you, death should be an excuse to give your players more lore. But if you also wanted to just be really fun, you could make a custom roll table for your reincarnation spell. Perhaps you can turn into animals as well, and then all of a sudden you have an armadillo with a harmonica strapped to their back as the bard in the party. Number 7, the environment. Some of you may remember a scene in Detective Pikachu, so I guess spoilers. It's where Pikachu lies on a stump after an incredible fall, seemingly close to death, and the main character begs these group of Bulbasaurs to help. After a moment of uncertainty and apparently a language barrier, they seem to have gotten the message. So they take Pikachu up and into the woods to be healed by a Mewtwo. There are many examples of this in movies, but that was just a recent one for me. But especially if your characters are great at roleplay, what if other creatures or wildlife in the woods see your characters crying or having an emotional reaction to a player going down? Or a druid actually petitions nature in the heat of the moment. But how does the environment respond? Perhaps a bunch of birds and chipmunks and squirrels get your attention and start leading you into the forest to find an ancient unicorn. Or you're in the Underdark and a group of tiny little walking mushrooms pick up the body and take it to a healing pool deep within the caves. Your players may even be weary of these mushrooms and attack on sight. And in that case, you tried. Number 8, a phoenix feather, also known for its life-restoring properties. Some of you know it from Harry Potter or other media, but I actually used this one in my own campaign. Unfortunately, this character died after a sea of awakened seaweed with just a bunch of bad rolls. However, they were headed to this volcanic island that I had planned was also a connection to the plane of fire. The character's backstory was that he was a warlock of his father, who he only knew as the embodiment of the sea. So I saw an opportunity, and I seized it. The adventure led down into the volcano next, and I sat this player down and I told them that there might be an opportunity to revive their player if they make the right choices. So the party picked up his temporary character at the local city before they went down into the adventure. And as they explored this ancient ruined fire giant city down at the bottom, they saw this phoenix flying around. They followed it and it led them to the entrance of this plane of fire. Turns out the embodiment of the sea also knew the embodiment of the flames. This lesser fire deity emerged from the plane of fire and started to share a few things about this dead player's father. Luckily, the dead player wasn't there, so they didn't get to question too deeply. But as a gift from their aloof father, this deity gave them a phoenix feather to use to revive their dead friend. Number 9, a magic item. The players may know from the beginning that it will be hard to revive characters, so they start out the adventures by trying to seek out magic items that will help them to do so. This gives you ample opportunity to lay out quest lines in order for them to find this object, possibly in the clutches of another creature. One item in particular is the Cauldron of Rebirth that might have a hag that owned it. Perhaps they track down the witch Igwilv herself in order to obtain it. If they decided to petition the hag to trade for the items, perhaps they came with an assortment of gifts themselves. A couple other items with the spell Revivify would be Steel, the sword, and the teeth of Delvernar. An item with the resurrection spell, the Rod of Resurrection. Or you can create your own item with similar capabilities. Perhaps it only has a few charges before it loses all of its magical capabilities and your party has to go find another one if they choose to. Number 10, a new spell. Firstly, speaking of homebrew, perhaps you have a lot of spellcasters in your party and they might be invested in creating a new spell for themselves as they level up. Instead of spells like Revivify that they just know upon level up, perhaps it's something that they themselves create. Perhaps Revivify or spells like it do not exist in this world yet, and this party sees a need and fills it. Or on the other hand, you can just make this spell accessible through a spell scroll, and only when they find this spell scroll, they can copy it into a spell book of sorts. However, there's only one scroll of this type in existence because the knowledge to create a scroll like this has been lost to centuries. And so possibly the only person that can cast these spells is the one that holds the scroll. Perhaps it's in the possession of a noble, or in an underground facility in a dwarven maze. Or they realize that an NPC that's actually been traveling with the party has actually been testing them. Looking for kindness and compassion, and once satisfied, they entrust this scroll to them. And don't be afraid to test your players, because the more that things are earned, the more they are valued. Imagine how happy the players would be, especially after one player became undead through a Lich and another was reincarnated through a druid, that now neither of them have to worry about the next player death. Sure, they took hits along the way, but they're a little safer now. Number 11, new components, because I had 11 ideas and I didn't want to force it into 10. Perhaps instead of taking a long journey to find a magical item or the long lost Revivify spell, you're taking a journey to find new and unique material components to replace what you had before. Instead of a diamond worth 300 gold in order to cast Revivify, instead you go out to find the bones of a dragon. Still something incredibly rare, but let your players know that you can switch out components if they're worth enough. And this can go across all of your spells. Watch your players get super creative when it comes to components, and don't be afraid to say no when it gets a little bit silly. This adds some fun elements to the game with material gathering as well. Now your player is motivated to steal the red hat off of a red cap where they might not previously have done so, a hardcore of a warforged, or a suction cup off of a kraken, or it could be a soul essence from a creature from the Shadowfell. As long as they are mindful and actively prepare to get items of worth throughout your adventure, you should absolutely reward them for it. But with all of these ideas, I hope that you feel inspired to create new scenarios and options in the event of a player death, using it as a narrative storytelling tool instead of a brief pit stop and a nuisance as they pay a cleric a tithe and go on their merry way. Create a campaign with moments that your players will never forget and will share with themselves for years to come. If you need help with making villains more impactful in your game and need inspiration, check out this video next. But in the meantime, go out there and spread the good word of D&D and make the world a better place, both on and off your tables. See you in the next one.